Hey everyone, what's up? So hopefully a quick one today, and this is going to be going over landscape enhancements. Now this is something that I love to do with all landscape images. I love shooting landscape photography. It's one of the few times I get to actually sort of set up and take my time with a shot, really properly compose something together, rather than a lot of the stuff that I end up doing, which is mostly music photography, which is very quick in the moment, not enough time to prepare things. So I always love coming in and editing these kind of shots because I find I take my time more with them, and I focus on one photo in particular rather than applying the same thing to a whole batch of stuff. Hence, when I do music photography, that's generally what I'll do. I'll take a set of photos, have the same look and style across, and send them over to the client. But with these ones, I do like to take my time. So I thought today we'd just go over some tricks and some few things that I do in Lightroom to just really enhance those landscape images, bring out the correct details, and most importantly, add more depth and dimension into your photos. Now, this is something that I do talk about a lot, and if you ever go into my course, there's loads of stuff in there about an editing mindset and creating that sort of illusion of depth within your photos. And this is where these enhancements can really come in. So if we take this photo here, for example, this is with the enhancements already over the top, and we can see that it looks kind of nice. There's this sort of nice muted tone over the top, which is using one of my moody green presets and then tweaked from that point. But also you can see that there's some nice lighter points on the long exposure there. There's this nice kind of yellow background here, darker bits, and the light kind of falls where you'd expect it to. But the majority of this is actually done with the masks. So if I go over here and I toggle off all of my masks, this is with just the preset over the top. Now you can see that whole yellow light source in the back, the black shadowing, it's all gone. And suddenly this image just feels a lot flatter. Whereas if I let go of this and turn all the masks back on, we've got a little bit more dimension to the image. So there's two things that we're going to keep in my minds as we're doing this. And the first one is light, and the second one is the details. So we're going to tackle the light first, and then we're going to have a talk about a couple of things we can do to help the details in the image. Okay, now luckily I've made a virtual copy of this so that I've already not wasted all my masks. I would encourage, when you're doing this type of thing, make a couple of virtual copies anyway, and you can do that by going in and right-clicking on your photo in your library and create virtual copy. So now what I can do is basically reset all of these masks. The first thing that I like to do then is kind of create a light source, and this is a trick that I do with a lot of photos, and that is I take a radial gradient and I kind of look at where my light is going to be. Now you saw when we originally started we had this yellow light sort of in the background here. So I'm almost envisioning my light coming across this over the rocks where this brightest point in the photo is. And then having some more shadows down here in the dark points. Now, if you never got quite sure where the bright light actually is in your photo, you can always do that by going down and seeing what you've done with the highlights. You can see I've crushed them a lot here to get that flat image, and just drag that up to the full. You can even hit J on your keyboard if something's peaking, that might help as well. But in this case, you can see here where naturally our actual light is coming through and touching, and that is all of those rocks here, the waterfall, and down onto these rocks. I'm not as keen on this bit down here, so I might try and remove that, try and block it out a bit more black. But you can see we've got our light coming here. So rather than fight that, I'm going to work with it. I'm going to Command Z, return my highlights back to where I was. And let's grab that radial gradient, and we're going to put it just here, right over that. It's going to be quite big, very feathered, because I want this warmer temperature that I'm about to apply to look natural and not kind of look stuck in one place there. So the first thing I'm going to do is just raise the exposure slightly to bring a bit more light in, and then I'm going to raise my temperature as well for a bit of warmth. Adding that temperature slider, either cool or warm, in certain bits of your image is a great way to bring that sort of dimension and depth into your landscape shots. In particular, it works well if you were to go in the darker points and maybe do a radial gradient of blue down here. But that's not something I want to do because I don't really want too much blue in this image. But I have done it in previous ones where I have like a yellow up top, kind of like creating a sun, and then a blue down in the shadows. So that's looking quite nice there. I might just bump that ever so slightly more on the exposure. Next thing then, I'm going to look at combating that with where are my shadows going to lie. So we said that this looks like the darkest point. So I'm actually going to take a linear gradient there, and I'm going to introduce some shadows into the image. And I'm just going to target this area here. I'm watching out for up here because I still want my light to kind of be passing through. I don't want to darken down this corner too much. Now what I tend to do with these ones is lower the exposure and raise the contrast. and that just helps those darker points in the image, especially if you've gone for that like cinematic look and your blacks are a little bit faded. You could also grab the blacks here and pull them down slightly as well, just so you have a little bit more of a truer black in your image, even if the whole thing has that faded look. So let's toggle just those two on and off for the moment. Already a big difference. You can see we've added that a little bit more dimension by putting the light in the background coming across there and a bit of shadow down at the bottom. Now I've said that I don't quite like this bit at the bottom here, so I'm going to grab another linear gradient and I'm going to pull that up. Now the closer that you have of these, sometimes the more artificial that shadowing can look, so I do try and go for like a bigger spread, and it just makes it look a little bit more natural. I'm just going to darken that down a little bit more aggressive, and I will go over that with a brush, but it's just to tame it. It's too distracting at the moment. I want my light to be over here. So that's some basic lighting that we've put onto this. Now we're going to go even more detailed, and we're going to do some dodge and burn in Lightroom. So I'm going to grab a brush, and I'm going to raise the exposure up quite high, more than I would. This is just so I can see what I'm affecting. And I'm going to brush across some of these areas which were the brightest. So that was like the rocks over there, the waterfall coming down, this waterfall here as well, and then just like a little sprinkling of that water. And I'm using this as like leading light, where I'm trying to guide myself through the image using light there. So the waterfall is something that I want to help guide. I'm just painting over it with a little bit of exposure there to help guide the eye through that. That's a little bit too much, so once I've got it added on, I'm going to back it off and just increase the highlights slightly as well. And let's toggle that on and off. There we go. So now I feel like my eyes, even though we've done a temperature shift over here and an overall exposure shift over here, we're getting a little bit more detailed. So again, we go the opposite way. We take a brush. This time we put the exposure down, and I'm going to burn some of these really dark areas that I want to stand out a bit more. So sort of like down here, sort of down where this rock is as well. We said this entire rock we don't like, so we're going to paint over that. And I'm just going to capture some of the back sides of the trees up top there, and then this thicker branch here. And a little bit, just capture that rock formation. So I'm not trying to add any extra light in, I'm just playing with what I've already got here. And we're going to back that off slightly as well. Add a little bit more contrast in. And toggle that on and off. And there we go. So it feels a little bit more like these areas are quite black now. If they're too black still, you can go back into your mask that you were just using, and you could actually raise your blacks slightly to combat that if you still want that faded look. But it's completely up to you there. I quite like where that is. Just going to reduce that a little bit more. And let's toggle on and off. Good. And the final one then, so we just need to do an exposure brush to introduce some more light in detailed areas, the same way we just did with that. I'm going to go even more finer, and I'm just going to target very specific areas here, like such as the curve of that tree. Now, for me, these are my lightest kind of points in the image. It's where the light's going to be hitting. Landscapes are great for that. Just go around like the edges of the trees, edges of rocks, you know, really kind of highlight out any stuff you see, like these rocks here. Maybe a little bit on that bit there. Don't think I want to tackle anything down here. I'm quite happy with how some of this looks. But it's just that tree branch, just to bring it out. So you see that the light's coming through and striking that a little bit more. And then let's reduce that down slightly. Now I could, if I want my light source to be even brighter there, I can build upon my radial gradients. So like I had a radial gradient here, I could take another radial gradient where it would be even brighter, such as in that top corner, if we're imagining the light coming down. And I can increase the exposure over in that area too. And if I want, I could add even more warmth there. And that's just building like the radial gradients on top of each other. So you start with your big one and then work your way in on smaller ones. And if you've got a sun in the image, you could put one on there as well. Don't be afraid about peaking that sun. It's the sun. It's going to look light, so you're not going to get details around it. And let's toggle that on and off. Awesome. So we've got the light sorted, now it's onto the details side. Essentially, I'm looking at where does my eye want to focus, where does my eye not want to focus on the image. And this is going to be, again, coming in with a brush. And let's do an enhancement one first. So for enhancements, I actually go with the shadows. That's going to bring more details out in the rocks. And I'm going to go down to the clarity as well, and I'm going to introduce some clarity. If you ever watch some of my landscape edits, I tend to go for a negative clarity on the overall image, just because when you're dealing with like a lot of leaves and a lot of trees, if I zoom in over here on that, if I was to raise the clarity on this, it's going to become really sharp. So for example, I'm at a -18 at the minute. Let's just raise that up. See now, this bush is suddenly really detailed. It's actually quite distracting when you come out on the image. It doesn't look as good than if we went with a negative clarity. This looks a little bit more softer to the eyes. What I will do instead then is take that brush and I will go over with the clarity and with the shadows. Let's just check I've raised that up a bit. And I'll target some areas that I want to be a little bit sharper. So I kind of want these like main rocks to stand out a bit more. That one kind of down the side here. I like these ones that are quite sharp. I'm going for stuff that's, you know, really in focus. I did have quite a high f-stop on this. And we're just going to go and get the waterfalls and the water there as well. I'm a bit weird with the long exposures. I do actually like to apply clarity to these bits. Now that might be a little bit too much there, so that's fine. What I can do is increase my shadows, but I could, if I want, bring down my exposure actually. I'm not after bringing more light in here, I'm after bringing in more detail, so it's fine to pull down on the exposure in that sense. Okay, so let's just double check. That one looks fine there. Let's do a quick before and after. Nice. So you can go over any areas that you want with this. The tree, for example, might be quite nice. This one here, just to kind of paint over where you had that light, bring out a little bit more of the detail in the bark. And then finally, I'm not really going to do it for this image, but you could do the opposite side of that one, like we had the darks and the light. If we've got an enhancement tool, we can almost have like a de-enhancement tool, which is where we would take a brush and we go down onto the clarity slider, onto the contrast slider, and we go for that negative feeling. And this might be to paint over any areas like the bushes here, like the grass, where I really don't want it to be as distracting. Maybe some of these background elements, which are poking through. And this is just to blur them together even more. So if I go to the extreme, you can see this now looks very, very blurred in the background. I just want to go for a little bit of a touch. And again, it's creating that little bit of depth. So if you've taken a photo with quite a high f-stop, like this is f13 here, but you wanted a little bit more of that blur in the background, the clarity works well here. It's very hard to go the other way if you take the photo and you want to introduce the sharpness. So when in doubt, I tend to go for that higher f number. So let's toggle that on and off. And there we go, that's a massive difference. So if we quickly go down those different steps again, you've got the radial gradients, introduce like almost like a fake sun where your light source is. Use the highlight slider to find naturally where the light is hitting within your image. Combat that with some radial gradients or some linear gradients to go for that overall shadow look. Try and go the opposite side of the image. Again, make it natural to what's actually happening. Then go into more detail with your light with a brush that's going to do the same things, darken down and lighten up. You can stack these on top of each other. Just be careful not to go too far away from your image. So keep always doing that toggle on and off. And finally, do some enhancements. Pick out the areas that you want to be clear, you want to be sharper. Raise those shadows, raise that clarity, paint over those areas. Likewise, if you want some areas that are a bit too distracting, bring down those bits. So not necessarily the shadows, but bring down the clarity and then paint over those just to get a bit more of that softer look to it. But to me, this looks a lot nicer. Whereas this is quite a nice edit. It's just a preset, and this is what happens a lot with presets. You get the colors right, you get the contrast, you get all of the global stuff correct. But this is really where the magic happens. It's just taking your time with those finer details. So I hope that's helped you today. It's just a few tricks that I like to do on landscape photography. I'm about to go away to Crete and I've got the new DJI Mini 3 with me as well. So I'm hoping to get a lot of nice landscape shots that I can come back and use some of these on as well. But I will let you know how that goes. I'll put up a few photos as well. Do follow me on Instagram. I'm slowly starting to get more stuff on there. I am terrible with social media though. YouTube seems to be the only one I can maintain. But for presets, everything else down in the bottom. Please follow, like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.